All right, look, firstly, I want to thank Tom and the Carbon Underground because this is something I've been working on for a very long time, and we copped a lot of flack. I actually organised one of the first conferences on soil carbon and agriculture over 10 years ago, and we couldn't get anyone from the environmental movement. In a lot of the climate change meetings, we actually get attacked for advocating soil carbon. They said, oh no, we don't want any mitigation. We're going to have land grabs because people will start selling soil carbon. They don't understand the importance of it. And I actually feel for the first time we're actually getting a tipping point or a change in this, and it is critical. The other thing I really want to say for me, actually, the bio's a little bit out of date. I've been organic farming since 1972, so that's 42 years. And for me, as someone of that vintage, and I see there's a few of us of that vintage here, Rodale, has been always one of our heroes. I go back to the original, organic farming and gardening, and we used to actually try and even get ones back to the 50s and 60s because it was, in those days, was the main information we can get. And for me, it's such a great pleasure to be here. Coach was so great when I was there last week for the dinner and everything, and you took me around. It's been something I wanted to do for years. And, I'm so pleased to be here. And I'm one of the people, Vandana was laughing when she could see Coach's slides, because I'm out showing those pictures everywhere around the world. And rightfully so, because the research done at Rodale is world class. It is some of the most important research done on this planet. And that is why people like myself are going out, getting that research to all around the world. Every year I speak on every single continent because we need to get these messages out to people. What is being done in Rodale is one of the most important things. If someone is to get a Nobel Peace Prize, it should be these guys for what they're doing. So let's talk about why we're here. And I'll follow on with what both Coach and Kristen has said. In Copenhagen was not very successful, and instead of getting an agreement, we said, oh look, we'll keep the world's temperature to about 2 degrees C, 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels. I can tell you that is a mythology. I go to most of the climate change meetings, including the COPs, but also the scientific ones. Our head office is in Bonn, and the UNFCCC's office is just across the park from us. And I went to the scientific meetings just before they released the latest synthesis reports last year. And the scientists there are talking about, we might be lucky, and there's the chances of keeping it to 3.5 degrees. And they're saying 3.5 because if we get to 4 degrees C, they're saying we're into catastrophic climate change. Not 10 degrees, like in the New York Times. 4 degrees. And they're talking about, we'll try and keep it half a degree below. That makes your 410-pound man look very healthy to me. And, this is something that we need to work seriously on. And we need to look at everything we can do. There's no one single solution, but what we have here is one of the most significant solutions that we need to get out. The other thing is, if you look at the United Nations Environmental Programme's publication last year on what they called the emissions gap, between what has been pledged that countries will do and the types of real emissions that we're getting. And as we've heard, emissions this year are higher than they've ever been. We're not pulling them back. Kyoto's been an absolute failure. There's no evidence at all that we're stopping this. And for Kyoto, yes, we might have got some countries in Europe got slightly less greenhouse gases because all they had to do is close down industries, send them to China, where they could pollute and import it back. It saved nothing. It looks good for the Europeans, but greenhouse gases travel, so it's done nothing for the planet. So what they're saying is that we need to reduce, to keep the, to actually keep the temperature to 2 degrees C, we need to reduce current emissions by 8 to 12 gigatons. So I'm talking a little bit differently from coach. I'm not saying in this case, let's reduce all emissions. I'm actually looking at a much easier and simpler thing to do if we're going to achieve the two. I actually agree with what Coach has said. We can turn it around and bring it back to pre-industrial levels if we had the will. But let's, present something that's smaller and more doable in the beginning, so we can at least keep the rise to 2, and then we can scale up organic agriculture and bring it back to pre-industrial levels. The critical message we have to get out is this. At the moment, when we talk about mitigation, we talk about biomass. We're going to plant out more trees. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is, if you look at these figures here, and these are Rat and Laos, the latest UNFCCC figures actually show even higher levels for soil carbon. But there's 2,700 gigatons of carbon in the soils. In the atmosphere, we have 780. In biomass, all our forests, all our plants, 575. So the soils contain more than double the combined amount of carbon than the atmosphere and the biomass. It is the biggest repository after the oceans. The oceans are actually our biggest repository, but now we're acidifying them at such a point that we're actually causing incredible damage to ocean ecosystems. We cannot put any more carbon in our oceans, like we cannot put any more carbon in our atmospheres. We've got to pull it out of our oceans, and we've got to pull it out of our atmosphere. And the place to put it is in our soils. And yet, despite this, there is not one single UNFCCC, that's the UN climate change body, agreement on soil carbon or even farming. I have been part of the farmers' constituency within the UNFCCC now since Copenhagen, and we just a few months ago got them to finally accept that they have to look at farming. Just look at it. All the countries, everybody, a lot of the NGOs said, no, you don't go near farming. And yet, as we've heard here, farming is, depending on the figures, but most figures these days say it's around 30% of greenhouse gas output. How can we not ignore it? If we're going to have a solution for this planet, why are we ignoring the biggest emitter? But most importantly, what we're saying today, we can turn the biggest emitter into the biggest solution. Now, I just want to give a few figures, and mine are very conservative, because when I go to governments, I like to give them very conservative figures, and they feel more confident. So one of the things that we did in Copenhagen, we set up the Round Table of Organic Agriculture and Climate Change. And by the way, Tim LaSalle from Rodale was there in those days, but I don't need to say what happened after that with Rodale. But we'd love you guys back on there, because you were one of the founders of this. Like, they were one of the founders of iPhone. Bob Rodale was a founder of iPhone in 1972. So we've had this long history. The part of what we did then was to start getting peer-reviewed science. Now, we actually had FAO fund it for us, the United Nations Food and Agriculture, and we went out and got a whole range of studies done. I just want to talk about some of them. Now, this one here was by Andreas Gattinger and all, and it was a meta-study. Originally, we included it included grazing, and it included what we call permanent agriculture, horticulture. In the end, they felt they didn't have enough good data, so they pulled them out as outliers, which is a shame in a way, because we know that grazing, as we've heard today, can sequester far more than any cropping system. It is the most efficient way of doing it. And grazing lands represent over 64% of recognised agricultural lands. So, but what we wanted to do then when we got published, because we get attacked all the time, is make sure that, what we did was completely defensible. So these figures came in at around 2 tonnes per hectare. Kilos per hectare is the same as pounds per acre, by the way. You know, there's a slight difference if you need to do it. But when I multiply that by the FAO figures for agricultural lands, that comes out at just under 10 gigatons of CO2 per year. The manured organic plots, 3.5 tonnes. Another one, which is colleagues in Egypt, the Sikkim, the oldest biodynamic farm, they've been doing, you know, just under 3.5 tonnes per hectare per year for 30 years. So we have good data that 3.5 tonnes is pretty easy to do with good organic practices. We're not talking about inventing something new, we're talking about what we are doing now. Now that comes in at 17 gigatons. That is way over the emissions gap. In other words, with current good organic practices, we can keep things to below 2 degrees. But I want to take it one step further, and once again I'm pinching all coaches' data because it is so good. But in the Rodale had their compost utilisation trial, and just showing that we can improve organic systems and make them even better. They showed that it was actually possible because they could sequester over 8 tonnes of CO2 per year per hectare. That's 40 gigatons. That's the 40 gigatons. No, we can comfortably bring it back to zero with good organic practices. We're not talking about inventing a new science, coal capture, carbon capture, anything like this. We're talking about with what we are doing now, we can essentially save the planet. And this is the message that we need to get out. So I'll leave it at that and say that these are conservative figures. They're based on nothing new. They're just based on good, sound organic practice. And we don't need to spend billions of dollars in developing the technology. All we need is knowledge and education and training. That's all we need to scale it up. It's not much. You know, for the sake of what it costs to develop one GMO crop, we could save the planet by teaching people to become organic. Thank you.
Brilliant, Andre. Thank you very much. We do not need to